As most of you know, my bike is lightly modified, and that modification is nearly all to do with the sound of the bike. Although some of the things that I've changed in theory could make the bike faster, I don't actually know if they do. So I thought maybe it's time to find out. So I've got a couple of tests in mind, not sure how they'll work out, but let's have a look. I've taken the bike for a test run. The filming of that run was scrap. I've got one clip which I'll show you, but the rest of it was just scrap. It didn't work at all. Now taking the bike out in its stock build and done the same runs. Let me show you putting the bike back into stock form. I'm removing the open airbox filter. I'm putting the stock one back on. And I'm taking off the Akrapovic slip-on. Taking off the Leovint's cat and pre-silencer delete pipe. Then I'm putting the cap back on, I'm putting the pre-silencer back in, and I've trimmed down the support tube that holds it at the bottom so that it will slot straight back in instead of being the incredibly tight fit it is from the factory. And finally I put the original stock silencer on it. The bike's still not quite in stock trim because it has modified gearing, and it also still has the auto-tune piggyback, and that means that my speed, for example, tests won't match what you would find on your bike. But what I'm looking to do is to put each of those components back individually and see what the impact is on the bike. So the first thing to do is to actually take the bike out, repeat the same speed tests, and see what happens. So let's have a look at the speed tests. Now the first test is to open it up and see how fast it will go. I've already done this in the commuter build. Now the commuter build showed that the bike will run quite happily at about 95-96 miles an hour. What I found was that it was pretty consistent going down and back despite the headwind. It fairly quickly came up to top speed, and it would sit at that quite happily, almost at the rev limiter, and with that gearing, 95-96 miles an hour is what you are going to get. There was one point at which it did actually flick up to 98, so it may be that there's some more power available in that build that I haven't yet got to. Let's have a look at a clip of the Speedo of the bike in stock form. On the test run out, it was into a fairly strong headwind, and what we see here is the bike was struggling to run above 90 miles an hour. You have a brief clip where there's a bit of a break from the wind and it pulls up to speed, but then to about 93, and then it drops back down again. And on the way back you had the benefit of the wind behind me. And what we see in the second clip is it does get up to 95-96, but it struggles to get there. So what are the conclusions we can draw from that? With the bike in that configuration, running just shy of 10,000 revs with a 1650 gear ratio, 96 miles an hour is going to be the top speed the bike will do. I think you'd need to do some serious work to actually build more power at those speeds, perhaps to go faster. Probably a mapped unit would help. At the moment it's an auto-tune unit, so it's never going to give you the optimal power from the bike. So I'm giving away a little bit there. If I change the gearing, I might get a little bit more speed as well. But for a test bed, that's where it sits. What you can see is that in stock form, the bike struggled to overcome the headwind. And what I think's happening with that is that there's a lack of torque. There's a lack of actual power coming through in the stock build. Whether it's restrictions by the cat and the baffle in the stock silencer and a little bit of restriction in the airbox, maybe. For the second test, what I did was to try some 0 to 60s. Unfortunately, again, I lost the footage of the first time, so I've got one clip. I'll show you this one now. It certainly wasn't the fastest, but it did 0 to 60 in about 6 seconds. I think on one of the other runs I would have got a little bit faster, but it was the only one where I could actually see the speedo. For the second run in stock format, what we find here is that on the best run it pretty much matched the actual modified bike in terms of how fast it got to 0 to 60. There might have been half a second in it, but I suspect that the modified bike probably about half a second to a second quicker on the 0 to 60. What I very much felt is that there's a difference in the power curve. The stock bike struggles at low revs. In fact, on a couple of the runs, I just ended up with a massive wheelie off the line. Now, don't get me wrong, I wheelied off the line with the modified bike, but it was a controlled power wheelie. In the stock form, I ended up trying to slip the clutch to get it past the dead spot at the bottom of the rev range, and as it hit the power band as I released the clutch, then it clutched up into a wheelie. It was very noticeably low on power at the bottom of the rev range, whereas my commuter build just pulls away from nothing. So it's a much more rideable build. So that's what I'm going to look at in future videos. We've got the baseline now for the stock build. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take each individual bit and do it in turn. First thing I'm going to do is have a look at just the airbox lid and see if it makes any difference at all. My suspicion is it'll be such a small change I won't notice it, but we'll find out. Now, this is not scientific testing. I am not putting it on the dyno. I am not controlling all the variables. This is just a seat of the pants rider's view of what might change, and certainly my impression so far is that my commuter build isn't really any faster, but it definitely has more torque. If you haven't got a 390, I'm going to suggest you go and watch the video that Bagoros Performance recently released about changing the gearing and the impact on the bike of that. All of the small Dukes have what I would call 390 gearing, and it looks like it's really not optimal for the 125s, and you will get a benefit from changing. The gearing that's optimal to produce a higher speed on the 390 is very much likely to hurt your top speed on the 125. So go and watch that video, and I will see you guys next time.